I wanted to do kind of a brief segment here on the letter Z because I think over the last few days on social media, I read about a Russian athlete who had the Z. We've seen it on Russian tanks in Ukraine. The letter Z, it's a Latin letter, the last letter in the Latin alphabet, and the Russians seem to be using it as a symbol of propaganda for invasion. And, it's kind of murky what it means, but there is an irony that I picked up right off the bat that is just like a Western Latin word Z, or letter Z, is now being kind of the symbol of pro-invasion in Russia. So I wanted to just kind of dive into what Z actually is, because the first time I kind of got knowledge of it, so maybe I'm kind of behind. I spent too much time looking into these other things, but there was a Russian gymnast, Ivan Kuliak, who was criticized for shocking behavior after wearing a Z symbol next to a Ukrainian athlete. So I guess he was at some weightlifting finals, and I don't know the specifics. The specifics don't matter, but there are these two 20-year-olds, one's Ukrainian and one's Russian, and they're at the medal ceremony on the podium, and the Russian gymnast has a Z symbol, and I've seen the picture, just a giant white Z symbol, like right in the middle of his chest. And of course, my initial flashbacks are to the Olympics opening ceremony when you have Putin sitting next to Xi, and the Ukrainian team is walking out, and Putin looks like he's trying to turn away and not even see what's happening. It's just interesting when there's an invasion happening that the world of sports still goes on in some ways. Like now, I've seen the Russian teams not going to be able to play in FIFA and all this stuff, but anyway, that's not the point of this. Is that this Russian athlete's getting a lot, or gymnast is getting a lot of backlash for having a Z, and I think rightfully so, because the Z, one way or another, is a propaganda tool that basically means support for the invasion, whether you like it or not. And so I can't be the first person, because I've now seen pictures of Russian tanks in Ukraine with Z on them, and it immediately does make me think of World War Z, which not particularly what I want to think about in this situation. I think of Z for Vendetta. Maybe I can call the episode that. Z for Vendetta. Like, are they fucking coming after us or what? I don't know. But anyways, there's a good article in The Atlantic. Or not The Atlantic, sorry, no, The Economist, called Z is for Putin. So there's our answer. Z is for Putin. I don't know what that means, but let's continue. So The Economist says, as Russian forces assembled along Ukraine's borders earlier this year, many sharp-eyed observers of open-source intelligence noticed the letter V, the letter Z inside of a box, and a plain letter Z itself. The mysterious runes generated a myriad of theories. Perhaps Z was shorthand for Zapad, which means west in Russian. Maybe it indicated the Kremlin's desire to take out Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, with a Z there. But the article goes on to all these conspiracies might not, again, there's Occam's razor, which says usually the simplest, most rational solution to a conspiracy is probably the correct one. And the article seems to kind of go into that. By the way, if you want to listen to Occam's razor stuff, check out the Tonic Accord podcast I used to do with my buddy Drew. We do an episode I was quite happy with on Occam's razor and just conspiracies that can be debunked easily with that type of thinking. But anyways, the article notes that military analysts, since we started seeing the Z, reckon that the letters correspond to particular parts of the Russian forces that are actually involved in the invasion. So maybe like a certain regiment has Z while another one has V, or whatever. I don't know, Z in a box. It's clear that there's like a categorization going on. Now, you could definitely go down some rabbit holes with that, I'm sure, which I'm not going to. I'm not going to entertain that at this point because I don't have reason to, but it was probably just telling which forces were with which part. I don't know. I'm not a military expert, but yeah, it says that the letters correspond to particular parts of the Russian forces involved in the invasion. And it goes on to say, with more than 100 battalion tactical groups of between 600 and 1,000 troops from as far away as the Russian Far East operating in Ukraine, such markings may help to distinguish between them and their foes on the battlefield. So again, we're not getting a lot of information out of Russia right now, but let's say, for example, like the Z with a box is the forces coming on the southeastern side, right? and they come across Belarusian forces at some point, like when they're trying to encircle Kyiv. Let's just say that maybe they see the Z square and go, okay, that's not Ukrainian forces, right? It sounds like The Economist is at least implying, and other military analysts in the West are saying that that's probably the case here. The Economist notes, though, and this is where it gets interesting, in my opinion, is that since the fighting began, Russia's state propaganda has kind of turned this Z into their unofficial logo. Even it quotes how Russia's defense ministry has suggested that it stands for za, the Russian word for, as in for victory. I mean, if we have to look at what has happened so far with Russia, it seems like a tragedy of errors. Or maybe a better way to put it would be a tragedy of arrogance. Because I still don't know what Putin is intending, but it sounds like they marked these tanks for just be able to specify who's on your team and who's not. And now it's kind of played into this confusing propaganda to mobilize Russian people. And The Economist continues and talks about how the Z's adoption several days into the operation suggests the planning for Russia's information war may have been just as haphazard as the shooting war plans appear to be. There is a particular irony to making a Latin letter the symbol of war that Mr. Putin has justified in part by spurious claims that the Russian language was under threat in Ukraine. I can't even finish that because that is such a good point. I think I missed that part when I was preparing for this episode, but that is such a good point. Putin's so afraid of Western encroachment, but they're using a letter that's not even used in their alphabet in this sense. So it's crazy. I guess my takeaway would be that the letter Z doesn't really mean anything, but of course it's mobilized people. And unfortunately, the Russian people are so kind of siloed off that I think it's really easy to start believing stuff. I always think about this experience I had. I was back in Lake Como, in the town of Como, staying at a hostel. I was doing some hiking in that area. When I was working in Madrid, we'd have long weekends because Spain has a lot of bank holidays, so there were a lot of weekends I could get out. So I ended up staying in probably the best hostel of my life in Como, Italy, and I ended up biking around the lake on a shitty bike, no helmet, way too small for me, but that's beside the point. But one night I was having a beer in the lobby/bar. It was a cool setup. It turned into a club at night, but there was a Russian guy who was actually sharing my hostel room with me. And him and I got to talking and ended up going down to have a beer. And through the conversation, he talked to me about how he was living in Western Europe because he was basically not welcome in Russia because he had actually worked at one of these troll farms. And at the time, this was probably 5 years ago now, I wasn't as versed in what these troll farms actually were or are. But it sounded like the research agency, one of the big ones, it's really involved in troll farming, division, confusion, propaganda, and he was just talking about how he worked there, and their main focus was just causing dissent and chaos, and again, fire hosing the system so no one knows what to believe. And my new concern with this kind of Russian invasion crisis here is that I think we're going to get to some sort of a fire hosing phase where a lot of the Russian people and the Ukrainian people might be susceptible to confusion. Because when I was talking with this guy, and some of our conversations a little blurry because we definitely had a good amount of beers by the end of the night, but I just remember through our conversation, he was just talking about how he had to leave Russia because he didn't like the idea of this. And, he was an educated, I guess you could say an elite, and he chose Western Europe over it. And you wonder how many people are willing to do that as well. But you also just wonder, like Z, for example, as I'm talking about here, it seemed to just be identification for military installments. But if it's going to slowly turn into this instead, how will that mobilize Ukrainian people in different ways, I guess, would be the way I would put it. So I'm just worried that we've seen the violence already. We've seen the physical war in Ukraine, if you want to call it that. But I worry the next phase is information and cyber. And from what this gentleman told me in Italy 3 or 4 years ago, whose name I won't mention, he was just worried about what this leads to in the end, I guess, would be the best way to put it. So, yeah, fun stuff. Fun stuff, as always. anyways, as always, just want to thank you guys for listening. I've been really happy with some of the feedback I've got recently. Sorry, I can't speak, but I thank you guys as always, and just keep telling people. Let's keep spreading the word. Keep giving me feedback. Be critical. I don't care. Like I'm always willing to learn, and we're in these strange times, and I do need to cover other things as well. So I want to look into so many things. So we have a lot planned on the agenda here, and I kind of want to start opening up to having kind of a town hall format over the weekends, as well as long form conversations once or twice a month. Think like Joe Rogan, but more focused only on culture and politics, and no vaccine talk. But yeah, there's a lot of outlines for plans in the future that I'm excited about, and hopefully they'll work out. So anyways, you can find me on Twitter, Alex Kapitko, and then Centered from Reality on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, and all those third-party sites that show up in my data when I look at them, but I don't know where the hell they're from. But anyways, thank you guys so much. Have a great night, and I'll be back hopefully at the end of this week. Like I said, finals are going to get a little bit busy, so I'm trying to not comment too much on what's happening on the ground in Ukraine right now, because it's good to wait a few days to kind of see what the ramifications are. But anyways, for now, again, love you guys, and have a great night.